So, hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. This is Stella Kafka, and we're going to be starting in about 10 minutes. So as you come in, please feel free to introduce yourself on our chat, and we will be with you shortly. All righty. While we're waiting, do you guys mind if I take a selfie?
Yeah,
Sure.
Thank you. Very nice. So we're coming, people checking in. You can see on our chat, friends who are joining. Hello to New Mexico, Kentucky, UK, Ireland, Maryland. Very nice.
So Stella, just so I know, so that, is everybody seeing all of us at once, or are they just seeing the speaker, or what do they see?
So right now people should be seeing the slideshow and most likely all of us. And then when you start talking, they're going to be seeing the speaker. We have Finland. Hello, Slu. Welcome to the webinar. Quincy, Massachusetts, London, UK, Southern Arizona. Oh, they see all of us. No slides. Awesome. Apparently I haven't started sharing my screen, but that's okay. Hi, India. Namaste. Ohio, Finland. This is one of my favorite parts of actually the webinars because we see people coming in and they say hello.
We have more international participants than we have domestic.
I think you're right.
Cold, cloudy Columbus, Ohio. Well, happy fall, Ohio. It's cold here as well in Massachusetts. Hello to Quebec and Nebraska. Hi, South Africa. Heavy clouds in England.
It's going to be 80 degrees here in the Bay today, so.
And suddenly you're not my friend anymore.
You know,
We're 78, but rainy.
It's been really nice to not have winter. It's a nice break from having winter like the whole rest of my life. So
Yeah.
Well, I've always been a Floridian, so winter is like 2 days for me.
No, I have to admit I really like the fall here in Massachusetts. It's very spectacular at times. It started a little bit earlier this year, but I'm not going to complain. It's beautiful. Ooh, Maryland and Slu. Slu has a presence today. I love that. UK, South Africa, England, Alaska. Good morning, Alaska.
yeah,
Okay, I need help. How do you pronounce this word?
Which word?
Unalakleet.
Oh yeah.
Unalakleet.
Oh.
Unalakleet.
Now I'm tempted.
Unalakleet.
It looks like Unalakleet.
Alaska. Wonderful. Now I'm going to Google it and go visit. Mexico City. Unalakleet. Thank you, Ella. Wonderful. Canoogit.
Washington State also has a lot of Native American city names and things like that that you have to like be from there to know how to pronounce.
It's a learning experience. Southern California.
Yeah, it's been smoky here in the Bay. I haven't, even though it's been clear of clouds largely, I haven't been able to image most of the week.
Oh, that's quite unfortunate.
So hoping that clears up soon.
How are you guys doing with fires?
I guess I haven't really been keeping super close track because they're not in the immediate area, but I guess with a new fire that's producing a lot of the smoke, and my telescope gear has been covered in ash again. I need to go through and clean it again. My car is covered in ash. I just had it washed and then now it's covered in ash again. But yeah, and my science rig mount is broken again, surprise. So I'm working on fixing it. Unrelated to the smoke, it's just, it's dumb. It breaks a lot, so trying to do it again.
Yeah. Where exactly are you? You're in the Bay Area, right?
Yeah, I'm just north of Berkeley.
Okay.
So I'm not in like I'm in the city, so I'm not gonna be like evacuated for wildfires or anything, but we do get a lot of the smoke.
Yeah, I'm sure. So Gordon is on the other side of San Francisco. He's in the Bay Area as well.
Yeah, I'm down in San Mateo area.
Okay.
Yeah. So how is it around where you are?
You know, the smoke has been, we had like 30 days in a row in San Francisco of unhealthy air, which was by far the unfortunate record. And then it cleared up for about 3 days and now it's come back. I mean, I don't know what today's readings are, but yesterday the particle readings are back in the hundreds. Above 50 is unhealthy and above 200 is very unhealthy. And we're kind of borderline of that yesterday. I don't know where we are today.
I was at 150, I think, yesterday, but 87 today for the air quality index. So it's improvement. The sun was not orange this morning, so that was good.
About 3 weeks ago, we had a spectacular orange sunset here because of the fires. But if it traveled 3 time zones, I can't imagine. Yeah,
well, anyway, let you go ahead and get started.
Yeah, actually, we're going to move to something much more pleasant here. And as we're doing that, I would like to welcome our participants from Argentina, Rose City, Portland, Oregon. Hi, Oregon. I hope that you're safe. And thank you for joining us. Minnesota, Venezuela. Hola, Venezuela. Y hola, Argentina. So let's get started slowly. I'm going to share my screen. So again, welcome to all to the last of this webinar series. It's great to see you here. Throughout the 2020 webinars, we discussed Aavso Citizen Science, different types of variable stars and observing techniques of interest to our community. So we would like to close this series with a discussion session featuring our observers, the backbones of the Aavso scientific program, the people who participate in projects, and they acquire those really precious data that find their way to scientific papers. And not only that, PhD theses have been benefited from our observers' data, my own included, student projects, press releases, all kinds of scientific outcomes. And it's not only the short-term data that are being accumulated on a daily basis, but also the long-term data that are being accumulated for years and decades in a row. These are individuals who also enrich our database and mentor our community members. So these are people who are very involved with the Aavso. Each one of our panelists today has a different story on what attracted them to astronomy, how they ended up at the Aavso, and I'm sure we can all connect and be inspired with those stories. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the support of Boyce Research Initiative and Education Foundation, which provided online astronomy education, observatory resources, and research experiences to students, student teams, and schools to learn how to perform observations, conduct research, and publish the results in scientific journals, like the Journal of the Aavso. They have been a supporter of this webinar. We're really grateful for their help. And also, I would like to acknowledge the support of Attic Cameras, that manufacture a diverse range of quality astrophotography cameras and accessories, along with a range of free software to help you maximize the output of your equipment. Please visit their webpage for more information. As always, a couple of housekeeping reminders. At the very bottom of your screen, there are two buttons, one for a Zoom chart and one of Q&A. If you have any questions for our panelists or something that you would like them to address, please use the Q&A button. But I would like to invite you to use the chat window, which we're going to leave open today, to share your own story. Just tell us what attracted you to astronomy, why you're interested in citizen science, why do you like the night sky, how did you get started? This is going to be more an interactive session. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Another thing that I would like to remind you is that this little button that looks like a microphone is actually controlling the drop-down menu that helps you control your audio settings in principle. If you have any sound problems, please use that particular setting in order to fix them. We cannot help you with that here. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. And I would like to start our discussion with Dr. Barbara Harris, MD. She's a real doctor. She can save your life. And ask her to share her story with us. Barbara.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for showing up today. Like Stella said, by profession, I'm a physician. I'm an obstetrician and gynecologist. I am a doctor. I can save your life, but I'd rather deliver your baby. Unfortunately, I had to stop practice because of a heart condition several years ago. And like they say, when one door closes, another one opens. So even though I was disappointed having to give up my practice, it allowed me to dedicate more time to astronomy. I became interested in astronomy when I was in high school, where I took an English credit of a mythology course. And as part of the mythology course, every time they discussed a particular myth and said that there was a constellation associated with it, I would want to go outside at night and try to find that particular constellation. And also around the same time, I had a physics teacher in high school that concentrated on a lot of astronomy. And he was also an amateur astronomer and would host star parties. And that was the first time I was able to look through a telescope. And the first object I saw was Saturn, and it was just incredible. And I accused him of taping a picture of Saturn inside the telescope, and that couldn't have really been Saturn. So that's how I really got started in astronomy. Unfortunately, when I went to college with the idea of going to medical school, all of my courses were pre-med and aimed at getting into medical school. So even though I really wanted to take astronomy in college, I didn't really need it to get into medical school. So I didn't get to take astronomy in college. But by the time I got through college and medical school and my residency, I did my residency in Miami, and as soon as I finished, I figured I had a lot more free time, and I was able to join the Miami Astronomy Club, and I bought a small telescope at that time and got a lot more serious into astronomy. And also at that time, when I finished my residency, I actually went back to college at night to take several college level astronomy courses because I wanted not to just learn the hobby, but I really wanted to learn astronomy that would have been taught in college, and I didn't get the opportunity when I was going to college. I got more serious into astronomy, and then I decided I needed an observatory. And by this time, my husband and I had moved to the Orlando area from Miami. And we lived in a pretty light polluted area, but we started to look for property that was away from the city. And we started looking for about 5 acres out in the country, and we ended up finding 200 acres. So we live on a 200-acre cattle ranch between Orlando and Daytona Beach. And it's nice and dark. We have sky glow from Orlando to the southwest, and a little bit of sky glow from Daytona Beach to the northeast. But it's pretty dark, and it's comfortable. So I built an observatory, and we built a house, and everything was ready in 1999. So with my observatory, I wanted a CCD camera, and I purchased a CCD camera, but I didn't want it to just do pretty pictures. As much as I love pretty pictures, I wanted to look at an astronomical image, and I wanted to know the science behind that image. I wanted to know, I didn't want to just see the beauty of that image. I wanted to know the science that was going on in that image. So a few years earlier, I had gone, I don't remember where, but I had gone to a lecture that Janet Massey was given. She was the AAVSO director at that time. And she talked about variable stars and how you don't have to be a scientist to do the science of variable stars. And that kind of piqued my interest. So I joined the AAVSO in '99, and although many variable star observers start out with visual observations, I had my CCD camera, and I didn't want to wait. I started immediately doing CCD photometry. And so I became very experienced and enjoyed doing CCD photometry. And loved it. And I think it was in 2015 I started to get interested in DSLR photometry. And what got me interested in DSLR photometry is that my primary telescope for variable star photometry is a 16-inch Meade Schmidt-Cassegrain. With a pretty sensitive CCD camera. It's a back illuminated CCD camera, so it's very sensitive. So in 2015, there was a bright nova in Sagittarius, and it got down to 4th magnitude, and I wanted to follow that star and do photometry on that star, but it was too bright for my system. Even at a few seconds exposure, it would get saturated at 4th magnitude. So a few years before that, AAVSO had started a Citizen Sky program where they started to teach the average person how to do photometry with a DSLR, and it was for monitoring the Epsilon Aurigae eclipse in 2009. So I had a DSLR, and I just plopped it on a tripod and started taking images of Sagittarius and doing photometry on that nova in Sagittarius. And I became more adept at DSLR photometry and taught a few of the choice courses in DSLR photometry. And now I also do mentoring for DSLR photometry. My favorite classes of variable stars are, I like cataclysmic variables. I like eclipsing variables. I love short period pulsators like HAD stars, high amplitude delta Scuti stars. And my primary observing goal is usually to look at the alert notices and the campaigns. So those are my priorities. Is I see what alert notices are out there and what campaigns are out there, and those are my top priority. And after that, I start to do things on my own that in eclipsing binaries or cataclysmic variables. So that's my story.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's go next to Bob Massey. Bob?
There we go. Well, hello to everyone. And I have to say I'm quite humbled by being part of this assembled group here. And hopefully my story won't be as boring compared to those of Barbara and those that follow me here. And in fact, I kind of resist, and Stella probably knows this, I kind of resisted even participating because I thought, what could I possibly have to offer? I just have been interested and I started doing it. And then finally, after Stella kept calling me all hours of the day and night saying, you must be on this call, I finally agreed to it. And then I got to thinking that, you know, in reality, there were a lot of things that got me to where I am today. Certainly I'm not some fantastic observer or imager, or but I think I follow a path that a lot of people have followed. I'm currently retired. I spent a couple different careers, but mostly in aviation and software development. So I didn't really have a professional background in astronomy. So, but what I did notice is that there were several people throughout my life that directly affected and kept me in the game, so to speak, when it came to astronomy. And then there were several events that either contributed to my advancement in astronomy and the scientific aspect of it, as well as several events that kept me from doing that. So I thought what I'd do here in this brief presentation is just kind of go through those. Those of you that are my vintage may see some similarities. For those of you that are younger and maybe just starting out or maybe halfway through your career and your lifespan and so forth, maybe I'll serve as a warning to others as to what not to do. So let me start out with the first individual that had a big effect on me, and that were my parents. My father was a self-taught engineer. He was a mechanical engineer, but he had a real bent on science, and he always had around our house science-related magazine. Oh, for the younger ones, a magazine is like an internet web page, except it's printed on paper. He always had things like popular science. And I think, I don't know, but I remember before I was even a teenager, I was reading Sky and Telescope, and I've been reading it all my life. And so that kind of got me started. I was pushed in that direction. My mother was, before she married my father, was a singer. And so she had kind of a musical bent. And I've heard often that science and astronomy in particular, there's a lot of correlation between music and astronomy. And there's a correlation here between my mother's interest in music. It's not quite the same thing. We one day had a traveling door-to-door accordion salesman stop at our door. And my mother thought it would be a great idea for me to take accordion lessons. And so I had this huge, whatever it is, 128 key accordion that I would drag on a bus to the other side of town every Friday afternoon. And the significance of this is I think my class or lesson was maybe 30 minutes in length, but I was tied to the schedule of the bus, obviously. So often I would be there early, and often I'd have to wait for the return bus much later in life. So there was a long period of time. And the second or the third person that affected my life is an individual by the name of Jerry Canoogit or Nugent. I can't remember now how to pronounce his last name. But in a 1959 issue of Sky and Telescope, there was an amateur section, and he had built an observatory, a rather huge observatory that was elevated behind his house, something like 20 feet in the air, because he didn't want to be near that boundary layer or turbulence layer and so forth. And it turns out he was like 4 doors down from my music lesson. Further down, so I would have never seen it because I would go to the lesson and walk back to the bus stop. So in 59, I walked over, well, I think I called first, but he was very gracious. He was about 10 years older than me, 15 years or something. He was in his 20s. And he gave me a tour, and that, I think, really turned all the lights on. I was interested in astronomy. I think my parents had I know they had bought me one of these original Spitzer planetariums that I would have in my bedroom, shining stars on the ceiling and so forth. But seeing these telescopes and so forth. So he got me started building my first telescope. It was a 6-inch reflector, grinding a mirror. I think that almost brought me to a grinding halt, because if you've ever ground a mirror, especially manually, turning a 50-gallon, empty gallon drum upside down and going back and forth and grinding that mirror. It wasn't a particularly great 6-inch telescope, but it sufficed, and that got me going, and I started observing and from that point on. Then along came high school. I had a science interest, but I didn't really get that much further than that. College came along, and my father encouraged me to go into electrical engineering. I spent the first 2 years struggling through that, and I had switched to applied physics. And after the first 2 years, and I transferred schools after that, and I went to the University of Wisconsin, and they didn't have applied physics. They had pure physics, but no applied physics. But they had two areas that are ostensibly versions of applied physics. They had astronomy, and they had meteorology. And at the time, I was young, and I thought, why would I want to stay up all night long every night? And again, you got to realize this was in the 60s. And so an opportunity missed. I end up going with meteorology, and that and aviation and so forth kind of took over. I spent 6 or 7 years active duty in the military, flying with the Air Force operationally. I got out after that and continued in operational aviation. But because of my meteorology background, I also got into various aspects of aviation meteorology and worked at a national level with several organizations doing research and so forth. And that's where the next individual, and I think the person that really turned me on to the science aspect of all of this came into play. I was appointed to an 8-member committee, a National Research Council committee to study aviation weather dissemination. And one of the other members, I initially could never figure out why he was selected to participate, because he didn't seem to come from a meteorology background or an overly operational background from aviation. And his name was David Tram, and I don't know how familiar he is to a lot of you, but he, at the time, was a professor at the University of Chicago, and he was a preeminent cosmologist of his time. And during the day, of course, we had our conversations about the topic, but in the evenings, for whatever reason, the two of us kind of migrated together and had dinners together. And this committee met for about 6 or 8 months before we produced our report. And in the evenings, we started talking about astronomy. I'm not sure what first started it, but he started talking about cosmology. And wow, it just took off. I mean, from that point on, I was just enamored with the science of it all. And we kept up a very, I would almost say, superficial relationship after that for a year or two, mainly because he created a great impression on me, but I don't think I created a particularly great impression on him. But we did correspond, and we had some reasons because of the work we were doing otherwise to keep in contact. Sadly, he was, well, his involvement in the committee was because he also had an airplane. And he had, I think it was a King Air, and he had a business card that I have to today, and on his business card it said Big Bang Aviation. And sadly, around Christmas time, I want to say 95 or 97, traveling to a second home he had in Colorado, he crashed and perished. I subsequently did a paper when I was getting my master's in astronomy a few years after that on him. And I kicked myself for not, even for the brief time I had, for not keeping in better contact with him, because what I learned about him afterwards is just what a phenomenal individual he was. But that kind of turned me into to really be interested in the science of astronomy from that point on. I found it very hard to keep up with family, with job obligations and so forth, to really get into observing and so forth. I've pretty much, even though I was born and raised in Wisconsin, I moved to Southern California in '73 and have lived here ever since. And it wasn't until the mid '90s or late '90s that I started getting more and more interested in the science aspect of astronomy. And I started attending, and Bob Buchheim will know about this, the SAS meetings, the Society for Astronomical Science. And I went to the first one in Lake Arrowhead that they had, which happened to be my hometown, so it made it very convenient. And I've attended most of them ever since then. And a lot of those were joint meetings with AAVSO. And that's how I got to know of AAVSO and what they did. And that, again, piqued my interest in it. But I wasn't really doing anything with it yet. And I would go to these meetings every year and see the people participating, great presentations, and saying, boy, I want to do that. But I never got pushed over the edge to start doing it at that point. In the early 2000s, I went to an event called PATS, which was a trade show type of thing in Pasadena, the first one there. And one of the booths there was Palomar Observatory, which is right behind me here. And they were looking for docents. And so I volunteered there, and I've been a docent there ever since. I've also worked in their archiving program, archiving plates and logbooks and things like that ever since. Again, that fed me to this, but I wasn't doing day-to-day astronomy, or at least any scientific astronomy. I met a gentleman by the name of Alex Mcconaughey, and I think several people here know of him. He was one of the originators of the Astro Imaging channel that Molly might mention briefly here later on. And Alex is quite the evangelist for astronomy. He got me involved in the Riverside Astronomical Society, and that is the point that kind of turned the corner for me, because I started attending meetings. I started to going to star parties and so forth, and the bug bit. I ended up having an observatory out at our dark sky site, and initially I stuck my toe in with pretty pictures. I found out that I wasn't colorblind, I was color deaf, and it just was so frustrating for me to do it. And to me, I appreciate it, I do it, but it seemed like I was spending more time trying to manipulate pixels than to try to understand the science behind what I was looking at. So once again, I was attending an event called Astro Imaging Conference up in San Jose, and I ran into Dennis Conti. he was passing around brochures for a professor that was looking to back up for some Hubble work he was doing with exoplanets. And I met with Dennis, I raised my hand, I started participating there, and I really haven't looked back since on that. So that kind of was the turning point for me to get me finally into active imaging. I've done some ZCAM work. I do like cataclysmic variables, and I know we had some presentations on that a few sessions back. But my time is of late has been almost exclusively with exoplanets. I'm part of the Survey Group 1, which is the optical group for the TESS follow-up program, and I spend several hours every day doing that, either with my own imaging or that of the LCO observatories, participating with that. So that's kind of my story. I suspect it was relatively boring. I think the couple of takeaways is I really would encourage people not to go it alone. It's too easy to get distracted, and there are so many people out there, either in AAVSO as individuals, as section members and section leaders, organizations such as SAS, and your local clubs. There's so many people that can keep your interest going when maybe it waned or something like that. And the other thing is, if you can't participate actively for a particular time, and I'm not talking about a specific night, but maybe in your life, whether it be career or family or other obligations, still keep up with it. I still read and follow activities, participate in clubs, seminars, and so forth. These webinars are excellent. I suspect there's several people here that may attend these webinars, get the bug, but are not in a position to tomorrow start imaging and observing. And all I can say is be patient, keep your interest up. AAVSO has, between choice courses and individuals and section material and so forth, has so many opportunities to keep your interest there. And I guess, Stella, that's my story.
Thank you, Bob. And also to remind data mining projects that we are launching slowly but steadily for those
that's
who have
very good point.
Dark sky, don't have access to dark sky, so have just 1 hour and would like to play a little bit with data. So thank you so much for your contribution. Molly, you're next.
Hello. My cat has joined me on my lap, finally.
These are our observing assistants, right? Our little pets.
Yeah, they help me with observing by stepping all over my keyboard and, you know, putting all kinds of erroneous data into things.
Selecting your targets.
Yeah, one of these days they're gonna slew the telescope by accident.
Cool. Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah. Let's see, I might actually need to do it this way. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so it's nice to have pictures with things. So I put a couple of slides together as to kind of show in some pictures and a couple of words how I got to here. So I started astrophotography in 2015 when I was gifted my first telescope, which was an Altaz mounted 8-inch Mcconaughey, and I also had a DSLR. And on my first night out with it, I got to look at Saturn and just was completely taken aback by how, I mean, it really looked like somebody hung a picture in front of the telescope. I think everybody's had that experience who's gotten to look at Saturn through a nice telescope. And my first thought was, this is incredible. And my next thought was, I have to show all my friends. So I figured out within the next couple of days that it was possible for me to attach my DSLR to the telescope using a special adapter. So I got one of those and was trying to image I was taking just like single frames of Saturn and other planets, and then tested out doing some long exposures on some nebula, and saw that I could see more of the nebula in the pictures than I could with my eye. Like the Lagoon Nebula was the first thing I tried to image. And that was just so cool. And the pictures looked so cool, and just kind of spiraled down the rabbit hole from there. I've had a growing collection of telescopes and joined my local astronomy club. And I joined the AAVSO in October 2019, and I became a Aavso Ambassador is how I got on board with the AAVSO. We're working on the Aavso Ambassador program is to try and recruit more people to the Aavso, but primarily a larger diversity of people. So more young people, more women, more minorities, and basically all the underrepresented groups that we need more in astronomy. So over the last 5 years that I've been involved in astrophotography, I've collected a lot of data, and a lot of that's pretty picture data, but now I've started to pivot to doing scientific observing, doing variable star observing, as I've been able to kind of build up my collection of gear. I've also done a lot of STEM outreach. I love to do talks at star parties, at astronomy clubs, do activities with local libraries, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, all kinds of stuff. Because the whole reason I got into astrophotography was because I wanted to share these incredible things that you can see in the telescope from darker skies with anybody and everybody who may not have a chance to see these things with their own eyes. And it kind of makes it more real, you feel more like the pretty nebula you're looking at is a real thing when it's taken by an amateur, somebody that you know, than by some billion-dollar space telescope. Like, you know that the Hubble images are real, but they just doesn't feel as real as when you do it yourself or know somebody who does it. So a little background on my education. I have a bachelor's in physics from Washington State University. Got to spend 3 summers at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, getting to play with a lot of physics toys, and really got me into the experimental side of physics and playing around with hardware. And it's probably one of my favorite things to do in astronomy. Is I'm just kind of a gear nut. I love to try out different combinations of gear, and basically I like figuring out how to make things work that shouldn't work. Like starting out with a Schmidt-Cassegrain on an Altaz mount is pretty much the most difficult place one could possibly start in astrophotography. That's pretty, like any forum you search, that's what everybody tries to steer you away from if you're just getting started. So it was kind of fun just to take up that challenge. And now I'm getting working on my PhD in physics at UC Berkeley. I'm doing neutrino experiment work. So to kind of go through my astrophotography story on how I got from using an 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain on an Altaz mount to the really crazy awesome setups I have now. It's kind of a fun story of experimentation and lots of failure, which in experimental science is kind of how things go. You fail a lot of times and then finally succeed. So after that first 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain, started producing some, now what I consider to be not great pictures, but at the time was so excited just to be able to see these things, these nebula and these galaxies. One of my uncles, he had been into astrophotography for a while, and on seeing my pictures decided to kind of get back into it and upgrade his gear. And so he gave me his old gear, which was a Celestron CGE equatorial mount and an 11-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain. And I was able, with the equatorial mount, I was able to take longer exposures and do a wider variety of things than on the Altaz mount that didn't track as well. So at that time, in the 2015, 2016 time, I would drive a half an hour out to my astronomy club's dark sky site and set up my gear on any night that was clear and maybe only had a half a moon or something like that. I was hauling about 200 pounds of gear up and down the stairs in my second story apartment to my car, driving out to the observatory, setting up, and then tearing down at about 1 a.m. and driving back home so I could go to school the next day and go, or go to work. And yeah, I was tired a lot, but I was living out in the Midwest, didn't have a whole lot of clear nights. So at least it wasn't every night. It was like one night a week or so. At that time, I was stacking and processing a deep sky stacker and getting some images that were really exciting at that time, just to be able to see these objects. So I was super happy to get these kind of images, and because you can see so much more color and so much more detail than I could see just with my eye at the eyepiece. And I was just getting super, super into doing astrophotography. So as I got more into it and plowed through forums and talked to people in my astronomy club who are doing astrophotography, I finally learned how to auto guide. It took me about 6 months of tinkering any night that I could get out to the observatory to get the settings right and get everything figured out. Finally successfully did it in about August, September-ish time of 2016. I started using my computer to control my DSLR and made some basic sequences in Backyard Nikon. And then my astronomy club purchased from one of our club members an observatory dome that we had on our site with a Vixen refractor and a Losmandy Gemini 2 mount. And then I was able to use that on some nights instead of having to haul all my gear out there, which was really nice. I started learning how to process in Photoshop, and the Celestron CGE that I got from my uncle had been having some problems, and I finally had to throw in the towel on getting that to work. So I spent a lot of time on my club's telescope, but got some really nice pictures because you can do a little more with a refractor than with a Schmidt-Cassegrain when you have somewhat light polluted skies. So the images on the left here are from the refractor, and the ones on the right are from my 11-inch before my mount pretty much quit working. And just getting more and more, the Rosette Nebula image there on the bottom left is what I consider my first good astrophoto, and that's when I kind of felt like I'd finally stepped into the world of astrophotography. So after that, I finally got my first Astro camera. I got a ZWO ASI 1600 mm Pro, which is a phenomenal camera. It's been working very well for me. I was primarily using the refractor out at the observatory, so I didn't have to haul all my gear out there anymore, which was really nice. And I bought a Celestron AVX after borrowing one for a while. And that in that time frame, I also bought a Takahashi refractor from my uncle and learned how to do more automation in Sequence Generator Pro, started learning PixInsight, kind of going up to the next level of astrophotography. And I acquired a CGE Pro from Dr. Clay Sherrod, who was helping me try to fix my Celestron CGE. We couldn't fix it. He sold me a CGE Pro at a discount. It's also had a lot of issues. Yeah, Celestron has not been my best friend throughout all this. And with that gear and learning PixInsight, I was able to start taking pictures that I was getting very excited about and feeling like I was able to share these in more places and be able to do a lot more cool stuff with. The Snake Nebula one is one of my favorites from the Texas Star Party, where it's dark enough to actually be able to image dark nebula. And finally, I am in this new phase of astrophotography. I've moved out to the Bay Area for doing my PhD, and I finally have a house instead of an apartment, and I have a backyard. And I'm able to set up in my backyard on what I call a semi-permanent basis. I don't have an observatory dome or shed or anything. Just throw some Telegizmos 365 covers over my rigs. So I have 3 rigs set up in the backyard, which is really exciting. And I bought a Paramount Mighty at AIC this year, which has been a real game changer because, again, my Celestron mounts have been difficult, if I'm going to say that kindly. Now there's a lot of light pollution here, so I've been getting more into narrowband imaging. And but since I have this more permanent backyard setup, I was finally able to set up a dedicated rig for doing scientific observing, which I've been wanting to do for a long time. So I've been primarily doing variable star observing, and I've done 113 observations since early July, which has been great. Because I revived the CGE Pro mount after it had quit working, was able to get it to work within its brokenness. I can't guide in deck, but you don't really need to guide so much for variable star observations. Although it's broken again, the RA axis isn't working, but I'm trying to fix that. Gotten pretty comfortable with PixInsight, and I'm just taking gobs and gobs of data since I can image pretty much every night now. It's clear here a lot of nights when there's not smoke. So that's been really fun to be able to get into that. And I'm planning on doing even more scientific observing with the science rig, which is the one over on the left there with the Newtonian, for exoplanet transits as well for NASA JPL's Exoplanet Watch program. And I've been getting some even more exciting images now that I've really getting into PixInsight processing and getting into narrowband imaging. And this dumbbell nebula image is my first bicolor narrowband image with RGB stars, and finally got some of that awesome background halo, which was very exciting. A far cry from that first dumbbell image that I showed on one of the earlier slides. And what's next? There's so much more to learn in PixInsight. Since I'm comfortable with it, I'm going to start diving deeper into that. Could there be a fourth rig? I recently, after my last webinar talk, another AAVSO member, Gary Walker, got in touch with me, and he's got some gear he's going to send to me, which I'm very grateful for. So I may be able to set up a fourth rig in the backyard, which would be crazy. Someday I'll have a shed to keep all this in when I have a larger backyard somewhere with a darker sky. And eventually I'll build a real website. I just kind of have a smattering of social media websites and things like that. But yeah, so there's so much more to do, and looking into doing a combination of scientific observing and more pretty picture taking now that I can have all of that running at the same time, which is really great. Yeah. So that's my story. Sticking to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Molly. This is awesome. Let's move to Gordon Myers, please. I love your astro pictures, by the way. It's just, you bring you this world closer. You make it much more vivid. It's just amazing.
Well, hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well today. I'm Gordon Myers. I'm the president of Aavso. So I think it's great. These whole webinar, all the webinars we've had have been really, really enjoyable. And I hope that you've been able to participate. And if you've missed some, I think you probably know you can go and see the recordings of them. You can get the links on the Aavso website. So Stella roped me into being here today, wanted me to talk about my own background, and I'll do that a little bit, and then also really focus on the organization and why you might want to belong, and how you would join the organization and participate. My own story goes back a long time, ancient history to many of you, when I was like 10 years old, and I was living in, I was a kid in rural Connecticut. And this sounds like an idyllic scene, but it was a cold winter night, and there was snow on the ground, and the air was cold, but the sky was clear and sparkling, one of those. But literally, I remember getting out of the car. My brother, Bill, was 3 years older, and he said to me, "Do you know what Orion is?" And I said, "No, what's Orion?" So he pointed up in the sky at the Orion constellation. And I still remember that as maybe the first time I ever, so to speak, looked up at night and actually began to grasp, the universe. And it's a special moment that I still have. And, through high school, I was always interested in astronomy, had a small telescope, but was able to, look at the planets, look at Jupiter, watch the moons going around, watch transits. And like everybody else, I think we all, that first time we saw Saturn through a telescope, it was like, wow, somehow that day. And it's so different than looking at a picture of it, to look through your, with your own eye on the end of a telescope eyepiece, seeing Saturn in the ring. So But after high school, I went to college and got an electrical engineering degree, in bachelor's and master's. And, you know, my interest in astronomy was always there, but as they say, life showed up, you know, family, friends, career. I was fortunate enough to be able to work on the Apollo space program. So I was really into the space technology back then, worked on the space shuttle program, a lot of computer work I did with IBM. But really up until the time I retired, I did not have a lot of time to actually do astronomy. I think one of the phrases we talk about a lot with AAVSO, and what I think makes AAVSO members different, is we like to do astronomy. We want to personally get involved in telescopes and in research and in working with professionals. And it's that personal involvement that makes us different, I think, from most other organizations. So after I retired, I started the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, was building a new Earth and Space Center, the Rose Earth and Space Center, and they needed docents. So I went down there and they gave you training sessions, right? I mean, they actually trained you in both astronomy and in the geology evolution of the Earth. And that got me even more interested, you know, or brought back the hobby of astronomy. And from there, I started taking courses at Columbia University in astronomy. And I met a person, probably the person who's had the biggest influence on me, was a professor, Joe Patterson, that many of you have heard his name. Joe is a world-renowned cataclysmic variable theorist and leader of an organization called the Center for Backyard Astrophysics. And this is an organization that gets amateurs actively involved. He works with people around the world. He's got a network of about, I don't know, 20 or 25 active observers. And he constantly communicates with us about what he needs and the benefits of the observations that he gets. And that marries with AAVSO. I mean, AAVSO is really the place I went to learn. And I can't tell you, if somebody says, why would you want to join AAVSO? If you have an interest in astronomy, and the fact that you all are on this webinar tells me you do, and you want to participate and actually do something, not just read, not that reading and being up to date isn't valuable, but it's different than wanting to actually, you know, put your own, you know, blood, sweat, and tears into actually doing astronomy. And I think that, you know, that's what AAVSO does. And Joe led me into AAVSO, and then working with, you know, a lot of the people in AAVSO, it's been a phenomenal place to be actively involved. So I'd kind of wrap this up with just a few minutes about, so is this something you might want to do? And why would you want to do it? Well, as I said, the fact you're on this webinar means you're curious, B, you enjoy astronomy. I mean, those are two things that I think are obviously essential. I think the question about AAVSO is, do you want to be one of those who participates and actually helps further research in astrophysics, working with professionals? Or maybe that's not the side you like. Maybe you love the telescope technology, how the equipment works, how the sensors work, that's your focus. And both of those skills are critical elements of AAVSO. You can learn here, there are courses, there's forums where you can post questions and get responses. There's a set of manuals that you can get to and read. There's startup material. How do you start observing? You don't have to start with $30,000 of equipment, okay? You can start with your naked eye. You can start with a pair of binoculars. There's good material on the website about the first 10 stars that you can observe visually and with binoculars. All of that lets you begin your own evolutionary path of enjoying variable star astronomy. Working with professionals, you know, is fun. There are alerts that tell you about campaigns where researchers need us, they need our data. I was talking with Richard Sabo a couple of days ago. He's an advanced amateur astronomer that I met through AAVSO, never would have known him otherwise. And he was just commenting, he was working with a professional observer from England on cataclysmic variables. And he made the point, where else today do you have the opportunity to actually impact research and science? I mean, it's very hard for non-professionals to really have that impact and be able to participate in that. And he just talked about how much he enjoyed that part of it. So my advice is start small. You don't need to have a big telescope. You don't need to have a telescope. You can also, by the way, rent time. There are companies that rent time on their telescopes, so you can pay money to get observations. We have, just so you know, if you're a member of AAVSO, what's called AAVSO Net, which provides for free images that you can tell them what targets you're working on, and they will schedule those up for observations and send those images to you, and you can learn about how to do processing of images. And I would, I can't think it was Bob, go slow, because the deeper you get into this, the more there is to learn. But I remember when I first started, like a FITS file. What's a FITS file? Well, that's the picture of the sky. Okay. Well, how do I process a FITS file? Well, there's these unique software over here. Okay. So first time I opened it up. Well, look at the header. The header has, thousands, well, it's an exaggeration. It's got hundreds, no, probably less than 100, but these different parameters. And when you look at the list in a header, you go like, well, what are those for? And what do they mean? And that's all part of the learning process. And to me, the fun. I mean, you're beginning to learn how to do this. So you can start small. AAVSO can provide the training, the education, but I'll close with what I think were maybe the final 2 points I would make. What's the human side of this? Why, as a human being, do you want to do this? Why would you want to be a member of AAVSO? Well, one of the things beyond the science is the people you meet. How do you find people who are interested in this subject? Friendships that you can build. And I mean, I'll tell you, when I was thinking about this the other night, so I'm just going to jot down a list of kind of all the people that I've met and friends, people I feel I could call and talk to. And I stopped after like 30 names. Now, I've been a member for 15 years, but it's a tremendous way to meet people of a wide background who are very, very interested in astronomy, who share this hobby and want to share what they've done, like the people on this panel who want to provide that insight into how to get into this and how to do it. And by the way, you can, how do you begin to meet these people? I always say at some point, begin to volunteer, get involved in the organization. If you have IT skills, do you have marketing skills? We need you. Do you know how to write an article? We need you. Do you know, it's not all, we don't need all PhD physicists. We need the variety of skills for the organization to really help us go forward. And the last thing I'll say is we're wrapping up a strategic plan effort after about 2 years. We started that study with a very simple question, which is amateur astronomy. I know some people don't like that term, non-professional astronomy, pick your term, but does it have a future? Is it really needed? We have all sky surveys, we have space telescopes, we have all of this new technology professionals have, but what do we have? What do we offer? Well, we offer the follow-up. If you talk to professionals, and we did, they are becoming saturated with data. They don't know how to handle and process all the data. They have more and more targets being identified. They need people to follow up on them. They have brighter targets than these telescopes can handle. They can't handle things brighter than like 16th or 17th magnitude, whatever that is. What's that, 1,000 times or 10,000 times fainter than the human eye? Anything brighter than that, they can't even look at. There are all of these opportunities to get personally involved. And I would just encourage you, if you're at all interested, try it, just get started small, take time. But I think for many of you, it can be a really fun place to be. So with that, I'll wrap it up and turn it back to Stella.
Thank you, Gordon. It's really interesting. If you want to do real science nowadays and use multi-way.
I think we lost her.
Yeah, Stella, we lost you. Stella, are you there? We lost you.
I'm here. I'm so sorry. Intermittent Wi-Fi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
What I was saying is that the ground-based follow-up of targets brighter than 16 magnitudes is actually being conducted by small telescopes, AVSO-like observer telescopes, because there are not enough facilities. There just aren't professional facilities to do that. So we are going to talk about the contribution of the AVSO at a different discussion, but thank you for touching upon that. Buchheim, your turn.
Thank you very much, Stella, and hi to everybody. There's still 100 people in the audience, guys, so it looks like we're sparking some interest. Do you see a blue screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. A lot of us are kind of echoing the same theme. Bob, Massey, and Gordon and I are roughly the same age. I grew up in the 1950s in the San Fernando Valley of Southern California. Those of you who are younger, you have no idea what a magical time that was. I was a first grader when my dad took me out into the front yard one evening to watch Sputnik 1 fly over. The Rocketdyne Santa Susana test facility was about 10 miles north of our home as the crow flies. And so we'd hear the roar and feel the windows shake when they were testing their giant rocket engines. And if the test was in the evening, there'd be an orange glow that would light up the mountains like a new sun was about to rise in the north. The little gang that I ran with, we dreamed of spending our lives discovering the mysteries of the universe. I'm the short kid. But as luck would have it, the stars kind of faded as we grew up. Eventually left for college, started careers and started families. But then about 20 years after this picture was taken, my wife gave me a telescope for Christmas, a very nice 6-inch f5 Newtonian on a Polaris mount. And that rekindled my long dormant interest in astronomy. Strictly as a visual observer and doing star parties for the local kids. This is a brownie troop. Then about 10 years after that, CCDs were coming on the scene. And one of my astronomy club friends got all excited about the idea of discovering asteroids, which he successfully did. And he started measuring their rotational light curves. And that was my first experience with photometry. I learned how to measure light curves, doing differential photometry, published the results in the Minor Planet Bulletin. And then I learned about variable stars because, as bad luck would have it, on one of the asteroid projects, one of the comp stars that I selected turned out to be a very rapidly varying, surprisingly high amplitude variable star, which gives you a really weird light curve for your asteroid. I looked up later, it was a high amplitude Delta Scuti, so it may have been one of Barbara's that got in my way. We talk a lot about the technology and the calculations and the science of astrophysics, but I have to echo what Gordon said, that this hobby, this science, is a very human undertaking. And there are all sorts of interesting people under the stars. One of the really magical things about our present era is we get to meet them regardless of where in the world they live. And as astronomers, we get to collaborate with them. Me, who could barely stumble through a bachelor's degree, Sometimes when I'm working with a professional astronomer like Gordon mentioned, Joe Patterson, or here Roel Barend over in Geneva, I feel like a guy who's strumming his guitar in his living room, and one day he gets to pull a gig with Bruce Springsteen. It's a remarkable opportunity and to both make a contribution to science and to do an awful lot of internal growth by participating in a sort of an unsung activity. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. I'll hand things back to Stella.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Bob. And thank you, all of you. I'm looking at the chat, and there are lots of individuals who are sharing their own stories there. And it's a celebration where people are coming from and what attracts them to astronomy. So let's talk a little bit about challenges here. What do you think it's the biggest challenge of people getting started? And how would you advise a newcomer to get started with the Aavso, with variable star astronomy, with observing, with anything for that matter? And I would like to start with Molly. I'm going to put you on the spot because you have a very wide spectrum of activities when it comes to astronomy. So what would you advise your peers who would like to get started? It's a really cool occupation, actually. We're geeking out all together. We're having fun, but at the same time, we're contributing to science and we're bringing the universe closer to people. It's not a simple thing. So your advice, Molly.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are overwhelmed by what the seeming technical difficulty of because there's kind of two parts. You got to get the hardware to work and then figure out how to do the processing and the software bit. And it can seem like a lot, especially if you go hit up forums and there's like all this advice, like you have to do this and you have to do that or it's not going to be good, and you have to have this mount and you have to have this camera. It could seem really overwhelming, but really you just got to break it down into more edible pieces, like you would any difficult problem. Instead of trying to do everything at once, first learn how to use your mount. If it's a new mount, if you haven't used an equatorial mount before because you're coming over from doing visual observing with the Dobsonian or something, just do some visual observing. Go find planets, go find your favorite objects, and learn how to use that mount. And then attach a camera to it and use the camera during the day to point at a tree and do some focusing, mess around with the exposures, get familiar with how to use the camera when it's attached to the telescope. And then manually tell the telescope to go to a target and trigger the camera using some free software like SharpCap or something like that to mess around with how long of an exposure do I need? Just learning how to use the software acquisition side of it. And then use the Aavso target tool or object of the day or something like that to take your first set of data, and then go and learn how to use the software. There's manuals on how to use vPhoto, and of course there's the forums to ask how to use that software, and run through a data set that if you're not sure that it's good, you don't have to submit it, but you can go through the process of processing that data in order to, or if you're not sure that if you're having a hard time getting data, maybe on I don't know what all the resources are, but maybe on AAVSOnet or something, be able to get somebody else's data to process through. That way you can learn how to do the processing while you're figuring out how to get in good focus or figure out your exposure times, things like that. You got to break it down into manageable chunks and try not to do everything at once, or it's going to be really overwhelming. And don't be afraid to experiment. If you have, use the gear that you have. If you have this telescope and a DSLR, then go ahead and give that a try. There's better ways to do things, but there's not necessarily like you don't need to necessarily have this exact piece of equipment in order to get this to work. It's a lot of experimentation and science, and that's like the fun of it, is figuring out how to make things work.
Barbara, your advice. You have been involved in so many different modes of observing, from DSLR to CCD, one of the first CCD people who came here at the Aavso last century, I just said, and also visual as well. If you are to advise someone to get started right now, what would you advise them to follow?
Well, the first thing I would advise them to do is to dig into the AAVSO website. There's a wealth of data there. Like if you want to start out with visual observing, there's a visual observing manual that you can get there. If you have questions, for me, I feel like I'm very shy and I'm embarrassed to ask questions when I'm getting into something that's new to me. But the AAVSO is very welcoming, and you could post messages on the forums. If you're embarrassed to post a message with thinking that people are going to think that it's a stupid question, you could ask for a mentor, and there are several mentors in any aspect of variable star observing. And I mentor in CCD, mentored in DSLR, and it can be very rewarding. And that way, if you're embarrassed to put a message out there on the forum, ask for a mentor. And I've known a lot of people that they just need that first contact with someone that's doing what they want to do, to kind of give them the push, because they've read the material, they think they know what they're doing, but they're not quite sure, and they kind of just need to have someone check over what they're doing. So the first step is to just explore the AAVSO website and kind of get an idea of what you want to do, and start there are manuals, like I said, for every aspect of observing, from visual, CCD, DSLR, and just take a step and don't try to go out and buy equipment from the beginning. Use what you have. If you don't have anything, you can do visual observing without anything. You don't even need a pair of binoculars. So you can learn how to do visual observing without equipment. And the next step, you may want to get binoculars, and then you might want to get a small telescope. And if you if you have a DSLR, I started my DSLR with just a tripod and the camera, because it was a very bright target. It didn't need to track, because it was just 10, 15 seconds of exposure. So start with what you have, and then go from there.
Sounds great. Bob Massey, I'm going to go to you and ask you for your advice. And also, when it comes to AVSO resources, which ones did you find more helpful to get you started with your program with the AVSO?
Well, I don't have a whole lot to add to the excellent comments of both Molly and Barbara. I think there's no rush. You don't have to be an expert 3 days after you start. And so when it comes to equipment, this isn't unique, something unique that I came up with the standard phrase is, what's the best telescope? It's the one that you'll use. And I can speak from firsthand experience on that. Many years ago, before I really got heavy into this, I wanted to get back into it, and I bought a 10-inch Meade LX50 Altaz mount. And any of you familiar with that, that thing weighs a ton. It is not portable in any way. I set it up in our master bedroom upstairs. That did not go over well, but I put a sheet over it. We had a small deck out in the backyard, and with a corresponding small sliding glass door. And to get that out to the deck was such an effort that I hardly ever used it. And in fact, I sold it before I did much of anything with it. And I lost a lot of productive nights because I thought I had to have some fantastic piece of equipment before I, proceeded. And to Barbara's point is don't go it alone. There's so much help out there, individually and in person, and of course to what you're mentioning, Stella, and Barbara as well. AAVSO is kind of like a one-shop stop for all of this. For me, I'm kind of like Barbara. I don't like to just jump in. May not sound like this, and the board may disagree. I don't like to just jump in with and stick my foot in my mouth by asking what I perceive as dumb questions, which I've been told there are no dumb questions, just dumb answers. And so you can go any route you want. You can certainly do that. There are people available on the forums and so forth, and you can act directly. But for me, I found the manuals that we've had there, and they've been updated over the years for all the different aspects of the program. And from that point, I jumped to the choice courses. And I don't know how much we've said over the years, over the summer about the choice courses, but these are held periodically on various observing topics germane to the scientific interests of AAVSO and its members. And they're held over about an 8 to 10 week period with, they're not live courses, so you don't have that pressure where you have to contribute from 8 to 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night or something like that, but you're given assignments and weekly study sessions and so forth. And then you have the opportunity to interact with both the instructor and with the other students. And it's very, very low pressure. And I found that to be excellent for me. I've taken several of those courses, and that's kind of rounded out between that and the manuals. Those have been the two things from AAVSO in particular that have really helped me.
That sounds awesome. And you're right, our choice courses have been a segue for observers to actually get started. They're being taught by very experienced observers and by professional astronomers. So this is a really good, no pressure way to gain knowledge and learn from others within 4 weeks. So thank you for mentioning that. I would like to move to a slightly different tangent here, simply because it's a question that is being asked by many observers over time. And I would like your take. It's fantastic that the AAVSO has a 100-year-old database, and you've all contributed data, either in short-term targets or long-term projects. At the same time, what we're hearing every day is about, the 30-meter telescope, James Webb Telescope, and these fantastic new surveys that are going to be scanning and are scanning the entire sky. So the question, I would like us to expand a little bit. Are we still relevant? Do we care? Why can small telescope astronomy contribute right now, and in what ways? And I would like to start with you, Bob Buchheim. Could you please tell us what you think?
I can.
Are you going to sell your gear tomorrow?
No, I'm not. I mean,
you're going to expand like Molly.
Partly, of course, we do this for fun, and the fun will never end. You may climb mountains. You're not going to be the first one to the top of Mount Everest, but it's still fun to climb the mountain. But in astronomy, there's we've talked in some of our meetings about brightness and observing cadence. Is the object faint or bright, and do you observe it once a year, once a night, once a minute? In a graph like that, there's the domain of the amateurs and the domain of the professionals. If you want to see a 19th magnitude quasar, that's the domain of the professionals. It'll be fun to try, but you're probably not going to succeed. When Betelgeuse started acting up several months ago, that was right there in the domain of the amateurs. As somebody mentioned, the the big professional observatories, they can't look at Betelgeuse. Their eyeballs get burned out. And so most of the data that you saw about the Betelgeuse outburst was visual data taken by people with their eyeballs looking at the sky. So absolutely, there today is still a role for the amateurs, and the capabilities of both the amateurs and the professionals keep expanding. The equipment that Molly has in her backyard, 100 years ago, a professional astronomer would have killed for that kind of capability in telescopes and mounts and electronic imagers. And so as the professionals move up and technology keeps moving, the amateur capability also keeps following. So there's no reason, I think, to expect that somehow we're going to wake up one morning and there is no productive scientific measurements left for the amateurs to do. I think there is always going to be that domain where the professionals need our experience.
Thank you, Bob.
That's my answer.
Same question. Awesome. Same question with you, Gordon. You have been actually involved with lots of colleagues on projects, for example, from TESS. What do you think your unique contribution is?
Well, I think, you know, a couple of different ways I'll answer this. One is, you know, as several people have commented, that a lot of the data that these stars need observations on so that they can be understood can only be obtained by amateurs because of the brightness issue, because of the filter issue, because of the speed and the time series issue. But in addition to that, the thing that AAVSO has is this link with the professionals through the alerts, through the professionals saying, hey, I need this data. That's something you can't get elsewhere. And that's, like I mentioned the story with Richard Sabo. You develop connections working with professionals where they really respect and appreciate the data that you provide. And so you know, as I mentioned earlier, many professionals are just feeling saturated with data because of the all sky surveys that cannot be followed up, and they really want us to help. The last thing I should comment on is what you mentioned earlier, Stella. You don't even need to have your own telescope anymore. A lot of this data from the satellites is now available for amateur analysis. And actually, we have a workshop, as Stella well knows, scheduled for this fall's meeting about how to access TESS data. TESS is a satellite that's used to track new extrasolar planets and identify them. But in addition to that, a lot of the data can be used for analysis on other stars. Well, you can get your hands on it. You can download that data to your computer and do light curves and analysis, et cetera. So there are lots of other things. So I don't see it. If anything, I think the demand for amateur observations is going to increase significantly.
Yeah, and we complement pretty much the satellite data as well. And, you know, I think we should have a webinar just discussing the contributions, the possible contributions of citizen astronomers to the AAVSO, actually in collaboration with those surveys, because I find that there is a lot of value in this kind of synergies, and perhaps we can make some progress understanding some of those objects, maybe within our lifetime, maybe.
Stella, can I elaborate on that a little?
Of course.
One of the other things about the amateur contribution as the backyard observer's capability has continued to be enhanced. There are things that were cutting edge astronomy 20, 30 years ago that are now well within the capabilities of the backyard observer. And remember, one of the essential elements of science is replicating the results. And I think Barbara would probably agree, in biochemistry, there's a real crisis going on because there are so many research results that haven't been, and it turns out can't be replicated, which makes you a little nervous. There are a lot of scientific facts that when you try to replicate them, you discover that the observer 50 years ago got it a little wrong. and you can demonstrate that in your backyard today and help push the science a little bit forward. So just because something is well understood doesn't mean to take it off your observing list.
Well, okay, so I'm going to put in my opinion here. We've learned, and we always learn every time we study something. There is something that is somehow understood, but well understood, I'll contest it. This past year, we've been spending the hours and hours of discussing what is going on with Betelgeuse. And we have more than 130 years of data on Betelgeuse in our database that are extremely unique, simply because big telescopes cannot observe a sixth magnitude star. And suddenly when the sixth brightest star in the night sky, and suddenly when the sixth brightest star in the night sky becomes the 21st brightest star in the night sky, and it drops its brightness so dramatically, you can't tell that if you don't have that history. And even that history is actually tiny. It's just 100 years. We're still debating what's going on with the next cycle on the sun, and we have 400 years of spot. So the reason why I like variable stars, because they keep me on my toes and keep me humble. Every time I say, oh, I know what's going on in there, it proves me wrong. So I came to realize that that's okay, right? We have to compromise a little bit, feel comfortable with saying that I am wrong, but I'm very willing to learn. Teach me more. Just be a little bit open-minded. And that's my personal take. Molly, I saw you kind of agreeing with me. Would you like to comment?
Sure. I think it was in 1905, 1910, something like that, was it Lord Kelvin? One of those scientists of that era said that we know all there is to know. There's not really much else to do in science now other than fill in, some of the gaps here and there. But they thought that there was really no new physics to be learned. And then suddenly quantum mechanics happened and relativity, and Einstein came on the scene and everything was upended, and now there's more questions than answers. So anytime you think that we know something, that we know what there is to know about any topic really, I would agree with Stella in saying that we don't really know everything, even on something like a single variable star, a single given star, and there's always something new out there to surprise you.
I'd like to kind of second that.
Yes.
I had a discussion with someone, and they were asking about particular variable stars, and I was telling them that I like to observe eclipsing binaries. And I told them I'll find out exactly what time the eclipse is supposed to happen, and then I'll start observing a few hours before that and a few hours after that. And they go, well, if you know exactly what time it's going to happen, why do you observe it if it's already known? And I said, because we get a lot of information from when it's happening. Because if it doesn't happen exactly the time that it's supposed to happen, then there may be something else going on with that star system that we're not aware of. Like there may be a planet around one of those stars. And that may be why it's not becoming dim at the time that we expect it. So you can't say that we know everything out there. And that's what's great about variable stars. They're variable for a reason. And even if we know that reason, there may be other reasons. So you've got to keep observing them.
Absolutely.
I've begun recently to think of variable stars are really a test laboratory for astrophysicists. It's like nature offered up a test laboratory, and variable stars are the test samples. And that's why they're so much fun to watch and so interesting.
Yeah, I'm telling people I have a very short attention span. That's why I study variable stars, because they do something unexpected and crazy all the time. Barbara, actually, I would like to go back to you on something that you said, that you really enjoy our alerts and our campaigns and participating in them. Could you elaborate a little bit more? What do you find fascinating about that?
Well, like I said, I like eclipsing binaries. I like different types of variable stars. But my priority usually is if there's an alert notice or a particular campaign. And I like those because I know that someone needs that data right away. That some of the stars I'm observing, they may or may not need my data at all, or it might be a few years that they want to look back on it. But with alert notices and campaigns, there's something that's important to a particular professional observer at that time. And to me, that's where I like to put my priorities, because I know that that data is important right now. So I usually start my evening observing session by looking at active alert notices and campaigns.
Awesome, thank you. Bob
Oh,
Massey.
Excuse
go
me,
ahead.
can I, one more
Yeah,
plug?
Please.
There was one particular alert notice that I started observing for a star called U Scorpii. And it's a recurrent nova, and Bob Schaefer, is that his name?
Brad Schaefer.
Brad Schaefer.
Yeah.
Sent out this notice saying that U Scorpii is a star that should, it's a recurrent nova, and it should become active about every 10 years. So this was the first time I heard about this, and it was back in 2009. So he thought it was going to become a nova again in 2009. So he put out this alert notice for AAVSO members to start observing this. And I started observing it every clear night I could. And what was unusual about this recurrent nova is that it would go from 18th magnitude to about 8th magnitude overnight. And within 24 hours, it would start to fade again. And so they want to catch it as soon as it becomes bright, and start following it and see what happens to it. So I started observing it for several months, and I happened to catch the night that it went up to 8th magnitude. And fortunately also, I had observed it the night before when it was 18.2 magnitude. And fortunately with my telescope, I could go that faint. And so I had it at 18.2 magnitude on, I think it was January 27th. And then my observation on January 28th showed that it was 8th magnitude. And it was pretty exciting because when I first saw it that bright, I thought, okay, I'm on the wrong star because I'm centered on this star and it's very bright. And it took me a while to realize what was happening. And this was about 5 in the morning. And Brad had saw that I was doing regular observations on that star and had sent me an email and given me his cell number to say that, you know, when it becomes bright, it's going to become bright and it's going to dim right away. So we need to know right away. So when you get the, if you find it brightening, don't just enter the information in the AAVSO database. Here's my cell number, call me. So it's like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And it's like, I need to make sure that before I wake him up at 5 o'clock, this is really true. And I kept taking observations of it and checking the position of it to really make sure it was U Scorpii. And I finally called him at 5 in the morning and he let out a scream, and it was kind of exciting.
Oh, that's really super cool. It's really cool that we're building this kind of collaborations, right? Between professional, non-professional astronomers. And it's really cool that we all are getting excited on something crazy that happens in the middle of the night, in the middle of the, somebody's sleep cycle. It doesn't matter then, does it? If if anyone else wants to share this story, please feel free to jump in. In the meanwhile, I'm going to ask a question of Bob Massey. I know that Bob, you are a member of the Aavso Exoplanet follow-up group, and you are participating very frequently in the Exoplanet Watch group that is building more of a long-term project to which we are part of observing exoplanets. Why exoplanets? Why do you care about exoplanets that much? I mean, okay, we found them.
You know, that's a good question. I guess I go back to Dennis Conte, and when it was a target of opportunity, really. I really didn't have any strong interest in it prior to Dennis circulating these little one-page flyers saying we need help. And he plastered them all around the little tables in the breakout rooms and so forth. And I picked one up and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And ever since then, if you were asking me today, and I would have never thought that I would be interested, in it. I'm not really sure. It like I said, it was a target of opportunity. I was already doing Zcams, and I found it interesting and so forth. But somehow the exoplanet thing just kind of caught my fancy, and there are so many of them. There's really two different aspects of it. There's searching for new exoplanets. And as amateurs, it can be done, but for you to just go out and say, I'm going to point up this star up here and see if there's an exoplanet there, that's pretty hard. Usually what you're doing is trying to confirm whether a previously cited instance is either an exoplanet or some kind of an interloper, such as an eclipsing binary or something like that. And that's all well explained in the webinar several weeks ago on exoplanets, our exoplanet section. The other, and you mentioned this, Stella, is for all the existing exoplanets, the timing of those, there's thousands of them that have been found, the timing of when those transits occurs gradually over time changes and shifts. And people are not necessarily with the thousands and thousands of exoplanets. And again, here's where amateurs can come to the rescue. For the thousands and thousands of those, they maybe have been observed once or twice, and you've established an ephemeris. This is the time when this transit will occur, every 2.7 days, and it's an hour and 37 minutes. And you can do the math, and it's done for you, but by a lot of different tables and websites and so forth, and say, it will occur at this time. Well, 10 years later, that time might not be accurate. It may be well outside of the 2, 3, 4, 5 sigmas of time. And so theoretically, you could lose that exoplanet. You'd have to start looking for it all over again. And what happens is the professionals, they may say, okay, we're going to look at a particular class of star and look for, we want to see the exoplanets around that class of stars. So they go out there and they say, here's 20 stars that meet this category, but nobody's looked at them for the last 15 years. And they go out there with the ephemeris that they have, and maybe half of them don't even show up anymore. They're still there. They're still rotating around their star, but they've shifted in time. So the Exoplanet Watch, which is a NASA JPL effort, is enlisting amateurs in particular to routinely look at these, because professionals don't have the time or the money to do that, and update these ephemeris. And they've chosen the Aavso as their repository for that data. So the AAVSO's Exoplanet Database is a database where this data is stored, and every night the JPL folks will scrape that database and update their database from it. So if you think that we're just doing this for the fun of it, well, we are. But it benefits everybody, all the professionals as well as other amateurs that are interested in it. And I guess it's a roundabout way of saying how I got excited about that.
Yeah, it would be a big faux pas if you spend really expensive James Webb time or 30-meter telescope time on which you're going to get 2 or 3 hours in a very competitive way to observe an exoplanet atmosphere and not know where the exoplanet is. And oopsie, we lost the exoplanet because we don't really know the period, because we haven't gathered the data. So it's a great service. And Exoplanet Watch is a really cool project. We're going to talk about it a little bit more in future webinars. Molly, I'm going to ask you the same question, because you went from astrophotography, which is a super challenging and a different way of observing, and you're transiting to exoplanets. What's special about them? Why exoplanets? And of all variable stars, why are we looking for ET? No, we're not looking for ET. But
so I'm planning on doing both, because a lot of the exoplanet transits, right now I'm kind of doing like the Exoplanet Watches, like object of the day. And I only have to dedicate about 2 hours in a night, 2 or 3 hours in a night to observe the transit. And then the rest of the night I've got queued up to do variable stars, other types of variable stars. But for exoplanets, I'm pretty young. I was born in 1991. Sorry, guys. And when I was born, we didn't know that there were planets outside the solar system. I mean, it was theorized, I think, but they had never been observed. And in just my lifetime, we now know that there are over 3,000 confirmed exoplanets, and that's just in 1 squared degree of the constellation Cygnus, from the Kepler data. And I just love the idea that, that's such a huge thing to know that there's other planets out there. And when the James Webb Space Telescope goes up, we'll be able to look at their atmospheres and see which ones may be capable of potentially having life. And so when we're doing exoplanet observing, like, we're not doing like a survey to discover new exoplanets, because that requires a lot of computing power. But we're doing these follow-up observations on exoplanets that have been stars that are discovered to have exoplanets around them. And just like what was mentioned before, unlike the big telescopes where a lot of people are competing for their time, we have as much time as we have clear nights as amateurs, and we can contribute in a real way to the observations and the science that are being done, and possibly catch another, because a lot of these planetary systems we now know have multiple planets. And if they're anything like our solar system, we've got our closest planet takes 88 days to go around the sun, and our furthest planet takes 246 years, I think it is. And so for a lot of the exoplanets we've discovered, they have very short orbital periods, but likely there's other planets in that system that have much longer orbital periods. And so we might be the ones to catch another planet going across that star that one of the big telescopes isn't going to be able to observe because they're working on something else. And those follow-up observations are also really important to establish what those orbits are. And that's really important for knowing how far away that planet is from its host star, and whether it might be capable of supporting life, or perturbations in its orbit can tell you about what other planets might be there that have longer orbits that we haven't been able to observe yet. So it's new and exciting science that can not only fill in the gaps in our understanding of solar systems or of different planetary systems, but can show us, we're surprised constantly by what other types of system formations there are out there. And by learning about those system formations, we can actually learn a lot about our own system and how it formed. There's stars that we're observing that have protoplanetary disks that are where new planets are forming, and we can watch that happen and see how our solar system probably formed. There's just so much cool science to do there. And even if you don't have the time or the know-how to do that analysis yourself, there are plenty of scientists who are doing that analysis and use your data to make discoveries about exoplanets and about stars. And it's so cool to know that you're a part of that scientific process. Like I do, you know, I'm a physicist, I do like science on the daily, but like I get to do this science as well. And it almost seems like it's like a lot of the stuff I'm working on is, you know, many years in the making, but, you know, I can go out in one night, observe a variable star and submit that observation. And then every week I get that weekly summary of my data has been used here and there. And it's just kind of a quick, what's the word I'm looking for? Like you get that fast satisfaction of having participated in science. And it's just really incredible to know that you're contributing to really important science and data taking, even if you're not necessarily doing the analysis yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. And actually on that aspect, Gordon, you have been participating as other of our observers, not only in the data acquisition part of projects, but also in the data analysis and authoring or leading a peer review paper. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience? I know that sometimes our professional astronomy colleagues are offloading, hey, we don't have time to write it up.
Yeah, well, actually, I haven't done that much of it, but when I did write one paper. That was an arduous task, but very rewarding. And what I mean by that is going through, first of all, the analysis of data. We were tracking the evolution of the change in the period of a cataclysmic variable. And I had to process, I think it was 80,000 observations that I had to pull out of the Aavso database, and writing software to process that and then look for, you know, microsecond changes over a period of 30 years in the period to determine how fast the star was, things were spinning up or slowing down. And I would say, you know, if you end up getting that far into doing some research, it's a real challenge, but it's also very exciting because you know, in my case, I was working with Joe Patterson and several other people from Columbia University, and you're seeing real research being done, and it's a real challenge. I want to tangent slightly to pick up on something Barbara said and that I found was interesting. And this whole question of why is it important to measure the periods of, you know, exoplanets or eclipsing binaries or et cetera. Back to 10 years later, after Barbara discovered the explosion of eruption of USCO, it was due again. And Brad Schaefer sent out, you know, start looking. And like a year later, keep looking. And then it was like, we haven't, what's going on? And so I was able to get some observations for him. And he said, that can't be right. Your timing's off by an hour. So if we went back and looked at all, no, I don't think it's off by an hour. And the conclusion that he has reached is, you know, we missed an eruption, and it had to have erupted there are two possibilities when it was hidden behind the sun. So anyway, he's trying to get new data so that he can figure out when it exploded or, you know, what we missed. But it comes back to nobody knows. I mean, you know, you can look at any of these, you know, exoplanet or whatever, guess what? Surprise. And, you know, that's a role that we can play as amateurs.
Absolutely. Bob Buchheim, I'm going to end this discussion with you, and I would like to ask you what you're up to right now and what advice you would give to those who would like to get started. You are one of our mentors, so how do you help our individuals to get their program started?
Your first question was, what am I doing right now? We were talking about timing of exoplanet transits. the identical problem shows up with eclipsing binaries, particularly ones where only 1 or 2 or 3 eclipses have been observed, and those were 20 years ago. And so the uncertainty in the period is such that you can predict there will be an eclipse tonight, but the error bars are like plus or minus 2 nights now. And so a friend of mine had planned to do a project with students on one of these, and well, there was no eclipse. So I've spent the last 3 nights and probably the next 7 or 8 nights searching for that eclipse that's gone missing, because we don't actually know the period of the pair. Helping beginners. I've started mentoring a fellow in Mexico on DSLR photometry just a few weeks ago, and his story was a little bit like Molly's. He had been doing astro imaging, but he really got excited about the idea of making a scientific contribution, and so he's kind of going through those same revelations of, oh, I don't need to buy a bigger telescope. That's wonderful. And I actually, the current mount I have will be fine. That's doubly wonderful. That my images don't have to be worthy of being the astrophoto of the day. And so I have high hopes that he will be prepared to follow the upcoming eclipse of B Per, which I think is scheduled for about a month from now.
I think it's the 26th of this month.
Okay.
It's
Yeah, I think
starting.
it's October 26th is, I think, around when they think it might be centered on.
Having said that, it might shift, but you
I know.
you can start observing right now.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
knows?
It's that uncertainty band.
With that uncertainty band. A last comment on working with students, Bob Buchheim, because you have been working very actively with students on different projects, astronomy projects. Why astronomy? Why don't you go with a different science field when it comes to student projects?
Well, astronomy is the only science I know anything about that won't completely send them off base. But it's kind of neat because I think there is a level of fascination with astronomy and the stars and the planets among a lot of people. Probably more than half of the population is at least intrigued. And there are, one of the things, there's a comment on the chat group, somebody pointed out that in our era, we have to overcome a hurdle of general distrust and ignorance of science. And one of the things that I have found with working with students on projects is after they get the data and do their analysis, the first question they ask is, did I get the right answer? Because certainly through high school and much of through undergraduate, there's always a right answer. And if you don't get the textbook answer, you goofed up somewhere along the line. And that's not how science actually works. In science, you're searching for the answer, and you may be the only person who measured that star in the last 20 years. Your data point is the truth today, unless you made an error in observational technique. And so they are a little bit befuddled and a little bit excited to realize that the right answer is the one that they got. The other thing that is a little bit intimidating to them is that in most of the databases, your data points are attached to your name. And so if you're the one who, inverted the image or did a calculation wrong, for the rest of eternity, you're going to be assigned credit for that mistake. And so it causes them to make sure that they double and triple check what they're doing. But they come away with a picture of real science, and not a collection of arcane facts, but a process for answering questions. And I think it's done good for them, regardless of what field they go into.
Thank you, Bob. And the little secret that perhaps you don't want to get them into the Aavs doing a rigorous data quality check. So if they have like a data point that has a problem, we'll pick it up, but just don't tell them. Just have your students have this anxiety at some point. Am I doing the data analysis right? It's a learning process by itself. I wish we had more time to discuss. This is a fascinating discussion, but at this point, wow. At this point, this is reaching the end of this panel discussion, end of our webinar. I want to be respectful of people's time. This is the end of the last session of our webinar series in 2020. All the recordings of this and all of our webinars will appear on the AVSO's YouTube channel. So please go there, subscribe, and take a look at anything you might be interested in listening to again, and or if you've missed something and you would like to actually listen to it, they're going to be there. Also, follow us on social media for updates of what's happening in the wonderful and ever-changing world of variable star astronomy. We are actually posting there. Send us feedback through the survey that you're going to receive as attendees. And please remember to renew your AVSO membership. We are fortunate to have members who are supporting this and other programs at the AVSO, so we would really love to have you in our corner. Next time we will meet at the AVSO annual meeting, which will be a fully virtual event this year. It's in November, and it is accompanied by 2 different workshops. One is on spectroscopy and the other one is on data mining. Registration is right now open, so please go to our webpage and register. I'd like to actually take this opportunity to thank our pretty much everybody, all our observing section leaders and participants, our panelists and presenters, the AVSO staff who put together this webinar series and brought it all to us together. It brought us together as a community at the time of social isolation, and it's of social distancing, and reminded us that social distancing is not social isolation. We are an international community that we come together, we can still connect, we can still discuss subjects of interest, and this can happen through those AVSO webinars. I would like to thank Boise Astro and ATI cameras who support our webinars, and all of you who are joining us and participating. This series has been a huge success. With an average of more than 250, all the way up to 500 and something people participating from 60 different countries in the world, which is encouraging us to continue this series in 2021. We're going to offer it free for everyone. So please stay tuned for the 2021 schedule. And we're going to actually send you links of how to register and information either through our social media or the AVSO webpage or emails at AVSO communications that we're sending. With that, I would like to thank once more our panelists today, Barbara Harris, Bob Massey, Molly Wakeling, Gordon Myers and Bob Buchheim for sharing their stories and all the wonderful advice that they gave us today, and all of you for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day, clear skies, and be safe until the next time that we meet. Bye, everyone, and thank you for participating.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.